Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the Special Collections and Archives Sam Gladding keynote event for the fall. My name is Tanya Zanish-Belcher, Director of Special Collections and Archives, and I want to express my gratitude for you being here. I can promise you will have an incredible and inspiring time with our Gladding book artist in residence for the year, Sauda Mitchell. Before she is introduced, however, I want to share a bit about the man whose name inspired our programming, Dr. Sam Gladding. Many of you knew Sam, and for those that didn't, I wanted you to know how special he was. He was a counseling professor who wrote over 18 books, 32 book chapters, 92 articles, and 45 poems. He was a Wake Forest administrator. He served as a mental health responder for 9/11 and the mass shooting at Virginia Tech. He was a researcher, a writer, a husband, and a father, and as one of his colleagues described him, a gentleman and a scholar. He was a supporter of Special Collections and Archives, and when he passed away, he left a generous donation for us. This donation, which we are using to support humanities programming, allows us to honor Sam and also give back to Wake Forest students, staff, and faculty, as well as the Winston-Salem community. I also wanted to give a special acknowledgement and thank you to Mrs. Claire Gladding, who is unable to be with us this afternoon but is watching online. Special thanks to Megan Mulder, Special Collections Librarian, Rebecca May, Public Services Archivist, for their work on this event, and as always, Barry Davis, IT expert, for coordinating the online experience. This presentation is also being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. And we hope that you will join us afterwards for a reception in room 403, which is right next door, where you will have a chance to talk with Sauda. And now I'm pleased to turn the podium over to Megan Mulder, who will introduce our speaker. Megan is Special Collections Librarian and Rare Books Curator and works tirelessly to incorporate our rare and unique primary sources in the Wake Forest curriculum.
Thank you, Tanya. Well, I am delighted to be here today to introduce Sauda Mitchell and to kick off her year as Tanya said, Artist in Residence here at ZSR Library. For those of you who don't know Sauda, I will just start by saying she is an amazingly multi-talented person, as you will gather from her talk and from this introduction. Sauda is a community supporter, a certified archivist and librarian, an educator, and a multidisciplinary artist. She has an MS in Library and Information Science from Drexel University and worked as a librarian and an archivist at the Savannah College of Art and Design, so some serious librarian cred, which I know this crowd will appreciate. She's now pursuing a doctorate in education at Drexel, furthering her research on student access to archives-based engagement and primary source analysis as a catalyst for elevated cognitive development. Sauda is also a lead archivist at the Winthrop Group and is currently spearheading the processing of a large corporate archive of local interest. So we're glad to have her on that project too. And she's also a printmaking and book arts instructor at Sawtooth School for Visual Arts. So she has a few things going on in addition to her residency here. Sauda's artwork uses a unique approach that combines primary source research with printmaking and QR code technology, serving as a creative, non-traditional access method. This method links viewers to archival repositories, curated exhibitions, and aggregated data, providing a visual response to archival collection materials and the diverse stories that they hold. During her Gladding residency at Wake Forest, Sauda will be working closely with students in Professor Ryan Bowie's African American Lit class, who will be designing their own archivally inspired broadsides and printing them on ZSR letterpress with help from our own Craig Fansler during the fall semester. In the spring semester, Sauda will create her own artist book inspired by ZSR's Maya Angelou Film and Theater collection and other collections. So stay tuned for other information about other events and the debut of that material also. Sauda's artist books are held in the permanent collections of institutions such as SCAD, Museum Art, MIT, Harvard, Smithsonian Libraries, the Library of Congress, and now Wake Forest Special Collections, as we have acquired one of her most recent works, which she will describe in her presentation, and then you can see in person after the talk. So please join us for that. We'll also be hosting a reception immediately after this talk, just next door in the next room. So please also join us for that. You can talk to Sauda and learn more about what she's doing. And now please join me in welcoming Sauda Mitchell to Wake Forest NCSR.
Thank you, Megan, for that introduction, and thank you, Tanya, for having me. And many thanks to each of you for carving out time to be here today. To my family and my friends and my esteemed colleagues joining virtually, thank you for being here as well. I was having my morning coffee today, and I realized that the debate is also happening. So I don't know on the level of entertainment that I can compete with that. So I do appreciate all of you for being here when you could be doing something else. So I'm honored to embark on this journey over the next several months. And in the early planning stages for this residency, I wanted to learn more about Dr. Samuel T. Gladding. And I came across a virtual presentation that Dr. Gladding gave, and it was entitled Off the Courthouse Square. And in his talk, Dr. Gladding shared fond memories of his experience as an undergraduate with photos and stories. And from that talk, it was really clear how much he cherished this university. And so I look forward to engaging with students in the places and spaces that Dr. Gladding held dear. So this evening I'm going to talk about my passion, and that's making meaning through the context of archives, artist books, and the African American collective memory. I'll begin by sharing where my inspiration comes from and what making meaning means to me. So today is also a very special day because I'm dedicating this talk to my maternal grandmother, who is still with us. And 92 years ago today, she was born. And so I had lofty aspirations at the beginning of the year to write a haiku poem every day. That's not going well. So I think I'm going to funnel that into my goals for next year. But I did write a haiku for my grandmother, and I'd like to share it with you in honor of her birthday today. Soft like brown knee-highs, she hugs me still, my grandma. Warm like bread pudding. And so my grandmother is the matriarch of our family, and over her lifetime, she served her community, her church, and her family, and she cared for others very deeply. She retired from Carver School, high school, as a custodian, and in that capacity, she touched so many lives, from students to the teachers there. And so when she retired, they just, poured gifts and awards and bestowed so many honors on her for her service. And so my grandmother also cared for others who couldn't care for themselves. And so she was caring for a family around the time I was maybe 11 or 12 years old. And so she took me with her to her job. And I don't know how I remember knowing that Dr. Maya Angelou lived across the street from this home where my grandmother was working. And so I distinctly remember, getting on my knees and looking out the window. And all I could see was this huge peach wall. And I thought, if I could just catch a glimpse of Dr. Maya Angelou. I never did. But it's those distinct and fond memories, through engagement with my grandmother and just being around her and her taking me to places, her workplace, and engaging with people and learning about things that I'm so appreciative of. And so, like that story, this talk is special, this residency is special because many of the experiences that helped to shape my career and inspire me to create happen right here in this city. And so a lot of the long-held memories and spaces around this city I probably share with many of you in this room who also grew up here. And so one of those places is the Malloy Jordan East Winston Heritage Center. To me, growing up, it was the East Winston Library. And this is where I had my first job. My mom thought that I was very close to my sister, and so my mom thought that I should start to, kind of gain my own interests. So I was around 15 at this time, and she gave me two options. She said, you can either volunteer at the hospital or you can volunteer at the library. And as much as I wanted to put on that candy stripe outfit, I didn't, I thought maybe I would see blood or something. And so I decided, okay, I'll select the library. But that experience really changed me as a person. It's where I discovered organization. It's where I learned about Dewey Decimal. It's where I became independent. It's where I started to develop leadership skills, working in the children's room. But there was something else that was particularly life-changing for me that happened at the East Winston Branch Library. And that was roaming the halls of the library. There were all of these photographs of graduating classes for Atkins High School. And so I remember my mom, she would always tell us stories, and she mentioned that she, also attended Atkins High School. And so the next day I went to work and I, just went up and down the hallway searching for her graduating class, and it was missing. And so I went home and I asked my mom, where's your photo? I didn't see your class photo. And so she began to tell me that the year that she was a senior at Atkins was also the year of desegregation. And so she was bused to another high school here in Winston-Salem. And so her graduating class never got to march together. And so they've been, ever since, they've been called the class that never was. And that was really important to me. It really stood out. I never forgot it. Because to me, it signified that if, there's a gap or something's missing in a narrative, in a story, in a historical record, then, there's no evidence of the people. And so I think in that moment and in that experience is where I sort of vowed that, I wanted to do something about that. And I decided to be a librarian. So when I speak about making meaning, I would like to propose two ways of thinking about making meaning. And it's all been in an effort to understand the historical past, mainly one, my complex family history, but also the African American collective memory. And the second way I think about making meaning is creating works of art inspired by the book as sort of a manifestation of the past in the physical form. I'm thinking about that as an art object, and the object offers physical qualities that invokes critical thinking, analysis, and in turn inspires students and researchers and scholars to make their own meaning through writing and creative works. The result is a continuous dissemination of information and the perpetuation of archival engagement through sensory experiences. So I grew up with my grandparents telling me stories. My mom used to tell me a lot of stories. And even to this day, my dad loves to share stories. And the culmination of all of those years of stories resulted in a solo exhibition at the Telfair Museum's Jepson Center, curated by Aaron Dunn. And so I titled my exhibition Recorder, and it called attention to the definition of the word record through its Latin roots explicitly, where cor means heart and dare means give. So in an essence, I think about recording from this definition of recorder as giving memories back to the heart. And so through a series of paintings, prints, and artist books, I executed visual responses to engagement with archival collection materials throughout my career. And with permission from repositories, it was a combination of years of researching personal papers, photographs, artifacts, and curated digital collections. And so a big part of making meaning for me is understanding thematic topics of study, to include my family history. And as a part of my exhibition, I created 2 works from Fluke cured tobacco and hand-carved sticks by my father. So in this image, you're looking at a copy of a marriage record for my great-grandmother. And the empty frame signifies a gap in my own family history record for information that we have been unable to locate in terms of my great-great-grandmother. So again, I'm still trying to understand complex histories and ties while contending with archival record gaps. So except for childhood memories, I had no prior knowledge of my family history beyond my grandfather until in 1999, Meet the Harstons, Black and White, aired on 60 Minutes. During that time, I was in high school and had no interest in my family history, so I was unaware about this airing on 60 Minutes. And it wasn't until years later that I realized my connection to the Harstons while working as a research assistant at the Georgia Historical Society. And during that time, I'd spent a lot of my work day researching for other people, locating their relatives, conducting genealogy, doing building research, but never really focusing on my own family history. Until one day, I was talking to my aunt, and we were talking about our family, and she mentioned my great-grandmother, Judy Anderson. And so she shared with me that my family had produced a family book, and my research led me to discover my grandmother's maiden name, which was Judy Harston. So I immediately located the archival collection that was centered around the plantations where my family derived from, and that collection is at the Wilson Library at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I nervously searched through several ledgers owned by the Harstons and became overwhelmed by the names of men, women, and children. And at one time, the Harstons' holdings consisted of 45 plantations spreading from Stokes County all the way into Virginia. And so making meaning of my own family history gave me a new sense of purpose for the work that I do now. And also, I embarked on a journey of self-discovery. So when I touch words or I engage with primary sources where my family names appear, I feel much closer to my ancestors. And even in my own art, I apply adinkra symbols as a way of protecting them. And then I surround them with tobacco in the museum environment in this piece because in another tapestry, which was next to this one, there was actually a photograph of my great-grandmother. And so I wanted to surround her with a little bit of home. And for me, that was always growing up smelling the tobacco in downtown Winston-Salem. So that was the reason for this piece. So if you peruse the library, you'll see the publication about the Harstons. And I read this book, and it just really opened up my world and my eyes. And so I'm dedicated to continuing my own family research history. So making meaning encompasses utilizing materiality, binding techniques, color palettes, text, and primary resources. I had the opportunity to journey to Penland School of Craft, where I created the artist book entitled Lebenloft, which you see today. And this artist book was created during a workshop that I attended at Penland called Stories Around the Table with Sue Tyrrell, who's an amazing ceramicist. And like much of my artistic process, it starts with research. And so I met with Martha Hartley, who's the director of Old Salem Museum, Gardens, Library, and Archives. And there I viewed records documenting Peter Oliver's life, and I became inspired by the story. And so while at Penland, Sue taught us the sgraffito decorating pottery technique, with sgraffito being Italian, meaning to scratch. And this particular technique uses layers of colors under glazes or colored slips. to leather hard pottery, and then you scratch off parts or layers to create contrasting images, patterns, and textures to reveal the clay underneath. Lebenslauf in German means a written account of one's life. I learned this definition while in the archives with Martha. She was so generous and pulled so many materials. There were books and copies of things everywhere. But during that time is when I learned that Peter Oliver, who was born in 1766 and died in 1810, was born into slavery in King and Queen County, Virginia. And the Moravian Church bought Peter Oliver, and he lived as an enslaved man until he earned and saved enough money to buy his own freedom. So there are documents in the archives where Peter noted that he was able to buy himself free from his status of slavery. And shortly after freeing himself, he married a free woman named Christina Bass in 1802 and established his own household on a farm 4 blocks north of Salem Square. So during my time at the archives with Martha, we toured the museum's artifacts, and I saw pottery that was created during the time in which Peter Oliver lived. And so I was inspired by the Moravian motifs, and so I brought those motifs over into this artist book. And it was really special because, with artist books, which basically are works of art that are inspired by the book, I was working in the same medium as Peter Oliver, clay. But for me, this was more of a reclamation because he was unable to sign his pottery. They don't have any pottery where his initials appear, and so I took elements of the sign that would have hung over the shop where Peter Oliver would have worked, and I incorporated bits and pieces of that into this plate. And so you see the 3 children that survived, but you also see the bird repurposed here to signify the children that did not survive. And so with other pottery that's at Old Salem, I was very inspired by the shapes and the colors, and so I brought some of those round shapes into Christina's hair to mirror some of the pottery that they've been able to excavate. While at Penland, I had a really unique experience. Sue Terrell took us on a field trip, and I was able to meet Jim McDowell, who is a phenomenal ceramicist and potter who makes face jugs. And during that time, Mr. McDowell talked about the bondage of the Middle Passage, and the reason that he makes his artwork as well is to honor people who came in this country through bondage. And so while we were there, Jim McDowell told us stories. He offered us drinks out of his cooler, and he gave us a tour of his personal studios, which I thought was, such a treat because, those, to me, my creative space is sacred. And he opened that up to us and showed us his studio space. What I distinctly remember and cherish is during his talk, he would often look over to me and say, "Isn't that right?" or "Don't you agree?" And, I realized that he was confirming things that, as a Black woman, I knew, even though we didn't know each other. It was just a part of our collective memory and experiences. And so that was really special and confirming for me, and especially in the work that I do as well. And so I brought this piece because as I was leaving, Jim McDowell ripped the price tag off of this, and he gave it to me. And he said, "I'm just so glad that you're in this class." And I thought that was just so special, his generosity. And so this is something that I really cherish. And so in the back of Lebenloft, I embedded an artist book. That was the challenge with this piece in trying to incorporate archival primary materials into this artist book, which is something that I try to do with many of the works that I create. So I just had this idea to poke holes in the clay and string it to be able to attach this artist book and embed it in the back of the plate. And so this is a close-up of the inside. I photocopied a copy of the original document from the archive with permission, and applied pigment to it to give it a certain aged look. And this is the actual emancipation document signed by Peter Oliver, so you can actually see his signature there. So I'd like to also share with you an artist book that I created entitled God's Battle Axe during another residency that I completed. And I really don't recall the moment in time where I first learned about Zora Neale Hurston. As I mentioned earlier, my mother exposed me to libraries really young, and so we visited the public library a lot growing up. So a lot of my memories are there. But in the fall of 2022, I was selected as the recipient of the Coffee Residency for Book Arts by the University of Florida in Gainesville. There, I immersed myself in the George A. Smathers Special Collections, where I researched the Zora Neale Hurston collection. And so Zora is one of the people that, or her experiences in her life is really significant and interesting to me. She spent her lifetime chasing whispers of people, voices, experiences, and capturing their essence for us to hold forever through dialect, movement, song, and dance. She was an author, folklorist, anthropologist, and most notably known for her published work, Their Eyes Were Watching God, in 1937. So when I began my research and learned about Herod the Great, which at the time was an unpublished manuscript written by Zora Neale Hurston towards the end of her life, the main reason that it presented itself to me was that there were so many questions that I had. It's not that it offered a lot of answers, but I found myself asking, myself these questions, such as why this story, or what was happening late in Zora's life that she felt compelled to tell this story, and what was she trying to accomplish, and why was this so important to her? And so I looked to Zora's early life for clues. In Valerie Boyd's book, Wrapped in Rainbows, she talks about Zora's parents, John and Lucy. And so I thought that maybe, when I read that at school age, she read things such as Greco-Roman myths and the New Testament of the Bible, maybe that's where it began. I still wasn't sure about it, so I just pondered what her intent might have been and what this manuscript could offer us today. So starting in the 1940s, Zora began work on a novel about Herod the Great, the man who supposedly ordered the deaths of children in an effort to kill the Christ child, according to the Gospel of Matthew. Saved from the fire after her death, the evidence of Zora's efforts to explain why her project would not only shed more accurate light on the cultural and the political environment of Herod, but also show similarities of Western politics during her time. So now I'm thinking of Herod the Great in many different ways. I'm thinking about the life cycle of archival materials and the power of archival collections as teaching tools. And just for a moment, what if Herod the Great, I'd like to imagine, what if Herod the Great was re-examined in our time? In the same way that Zora used this story to examine Western politics in her time. How many times could this work cycle, with the same intent for generations to come, be used in scholarship? And so I think of the body of scholarly work that would amass and what critical analysis would tell us. So I'm really excited to share that Herod the Great will be published, and it will be available January 7th in 2025 with an introduction from Dr. Deborah G. Plant, the editor of Barracoon, The Story of the Last Black Cargo. So for me, it was really interesting because I thought I was sharing something that no one would see for a very long time. But I'm also excited that this happened because Zora was very passionate about sharing this story. And so inside her introduction to Herod the Great, Zora states, "Why a life of Herod the Great? Because a biography of Herod would be extravagantly justified by the intense drama of his life. As a story for the sake of those elements which compel the interest of the reader, the life of Herod the Great is unsurpassed in human history. On occasion, it climbs to the peaks of triumph, and at others, plumbs to the utmost depths of human misery. In fact, this Herod appears to have been singled out by some deity, and especially endowed to attract the zigzag lightning of fate." So when I thought about this artist book, Herod the Great, there was no way I could tell this story because the manuscript consists of several huge volumes, type versions of the manuscript. And so I thought I would attempt to try to capture Zora's essence through God's battle axe, her impeccable fashion sense, her brooches. And so this was also the first artist book that I created an enclosure for. And so I used this rich black velvet, which forced me to surrender to its properties as I tried to ruche it. And I'm still working on this edition, so I'm still dealing with this fabric. And so there's also feathers that I sew onto the box. And the movement of those feathers just kind of whip through the breeze, and they create a sort of lightness to the enclosure. But also this artist book weighs 5 pounds, and that's intentional because I think Zora's work is so phenomenal and inspirational and has really stood the test of time. And so the weight signifies the weight that Zora work carries. I also was thinking about a religious reliquaries, and for the enclosure of this artist book as a sort of resting place for the sketchbook that I created that lies inside of the artist book on an elevated bed. And so with many of my artist books, I'll talk a little bit about the QR codes. I don't use a lot of text. On occasions I do, but because I'm an archivist and I'm merging archives and art and bookmaking together, in 2017 I started embedding QR codes into my artist books as a way to link viewers to the actual primary source. At the time, no one was really using QR codes in 2017 because it was pre-pandemic, and so I remember the first time I had my art was being shown at the SCAD Museum of Art. I actually had to put text on the wall of how to download the app for the QR code. So that's how long ago it was. But I felt it was important for Zora to speak for herself. And so I was also researching correspondence as well as looking at the actual manuscript in the collection. And so I came across this letter that Zora wrote. And in this letter, she began by apologizing for her bad handwriting. And then she continues on to state the status of her health, which was declining at the time. And then there were other letters in the collection where Zora mentioned her work on the manuscript. But in this letter particularly, which this artist book links out to, she writes to Madame Sebonnaire, in which she states that the life of Herod is something that she's trying, and it's more difficult than ever before. And so this is a sketchbook that Zora kept while she was creating or writing God's Battle Axe. Herod the Great. And in this sketchbook, I found it fascinating that she conducted so much research. She was envisioning the environment where the story would take place. And so these are her handwritten notes where she was experimenting with colors that might have appeared during that time. She talked about mosaics and musical instruments, and she even conducted some genealogy of some of the people that lived during that time. And so I was just blown away about the level of research that went into this manuscript. And so with God's Battle Axe, I took remnants of what I experienced and read in that sketchbook, and I brought it into physical form for this particular artist book. So the cover is embedded with mosaics. The inside, I'm using columns, which she also talked about in her sketchbook. But then I'm also incorporating other elements that I've used in other artist books, such as Adinkra symbols for protection. And I'm also bringing over the feather into the artist book itself, as well as photographs of Zora. And there you can see the QR code within the pen and ink illustration that links out to the letter written by Zora. And so these are some of the ways in which I've been inspired by my experiences, my own personal research, but also the stories and the contributions of other prolific writers. But I would like to talk a little bit about reimagining archival engagement in a sense of how these artist books are used and how universities collect my artist books as teaching tools, and how I also teach others how to create artist books. So Finding Aid is an artist book that I created for my solo exhibition, Recreader. And through a unique collaboration between Ohio University Libraries, the Kennedy Museum of Art, and the Museum Studies Certificate Program there, Ohio University Library acquired two of my artist books, Finding Aid and Voyage, as part of collection development efforts to celebrate Juneteenth. And this was the 9th annual exhibition of the Kennedy's Merging Concept Series, in which students selected two primary objects to loan from the university library. One of them was Finding Aid, and they curated an exhibition and explored the idea of illuminating the realities of the past to connect to the present. So students in this one-year certificate program represented different disciplines across Ohio University Athens campus, and the students were responsible for researching, selecting, and interpreting objects in the exhibition. They also had to plan and design and develop educational content, and also, as you can see here, install the exhibition. And so I was really elated when I learned that the students had selected my artist book to be a part of their exhibition as they were in their museum studies class. And so with Finding Aid, this particular artist book, I cut 10 linoleum blocks, 8 by 10, and each of those linoleum blocks represented a different story that I had discovered through a collection that I was working on at the time surrounding the civil rights movement in Savannah, Georgia. And what I found really interesting is that although these records were in different repositories, the stories were connected because the people who experienced the civil rights movement and who advocated for equality in the city, they knew each other. And so I would go to the Savannah State library, and there would be mention of, or a newspaper that would connect to the records that I was working on in terms of the NAACP in Savannah. And so I was really compelled to tell and share some of the stories that I'd encountered, as well as some of the primary sources, which included telegraphs from Medgar Evers, letters from Dr. E.J. Josie, who was at one time president of ALA, his correspondence to W.W. Law, who was past president of the NAACP in Savannah. And in their correspondence, they talked about so many things, but what was really exciting is in one letter, Dr. E.J. Josie wrote to W.W. Law and talked about the time that Dr. Martin Luther King came to Savannah and how they sat down and ate dinner, and it was on the anniversary of his death that he wrote that letter. So I've had the opportunity to kind of write about some of those things in various publications, but that was really exciting for me. And so it was also exciting to see how students interpreted those records and that information in their class, in this museum studies class, because they also had to create labels for the exhibition. And so one of the panels in that artist book is called Francis. And so the students researched this panel, and they linked out to the QR code that actually linked out to a digitization of a slave bill of sale. And they analyzed and critically thought about that primary source, and this is the label that they wrote. And I'll just read the first paragraph, and it says, "It's a sunny afternoon in Savannah, Georgia. The year is 1863. Soon, the American Civil War will come to an end, spurring a century-long movement towards black equity in America. All of this is beknownst to Frances, a 14-year-old girl who stands on an auction block in front of a white crowd. She is sold for $3,000. A bill of sale passes hands, and Frances passes out of the written record." So for the same reasons that I selected this primary source to include in this artist book, Finding Aid, is the same reason that students selected this panel to create this label, because they also understood that this primary source was the only evidence of a person's life, although it was a transaction for a human. They understood how powerful this primary source was, and so this is the panel that they decided to create a label for. And so I have, as Megan mentioned, I wear a lot of hats. So I also enjoy teaching, not only teaching with primary sources in terms of introducing students to primary sources, in a archival setting at a university, but also teaching workshops and encouraging people to bring, significant primary sources of their own and create their own artist books. And so this is a workshop that I taught during my residency at the University of Florida, where I asked participants to bring photographs or letters or small artifacts, anything that was significant to them, and use it as inspiration or actually incorporate it into an artist book that they made using printmaking techniques. And so I also share with workshop attendees how you can use different ways of folding paper and manipulating different types of materials to express feelings and share stories and invite people to share whatever idea you're trying to express through the medium that you're working with. And so this was actually in Loveland, Colorado, where I had an artist book on exhibition at the Loveland Museum. And so most recently, I've had an artist book to be acquired by MIT, and I created this artist book a few years ago without the intention of, thinking that it was going to be used in the way that it's being used now. But I wanted to share this quick little video with you that I just came across one day of Dr. Maya Angelou talking about Timbuktu. So I'll share that first, and then I'll talk a little bit about Timbuktu, the artist book.
Years ago, in the country of Mali, there was a city, Timbuktu. Timbuktu is still there. But 1,000 years ago, there was a university in Timbuktu. Scholars from all over the world, scholars from Asia, from Europe, everywhere came there to study. It was said by Leo Africanus in the 1400s that the king of Timbuktu, of that area, gave monies to scholars. Now, maybe we're seeing a case of the first scholarship there. I don't know. But it was also said by Ibn Battuta, an Arab explorer, that more monies were spent on manuscripts coming from the Barbary, manuscripts from Spain and about. More monies were spent there in that kind of trade than on anything else in Timbuktu. We hear the word Timbuktu and think immediately that it's a word made up to explain the difference, the distance between the known and the unknown. Timbuktu is still there today. Unfortunately, the biting sands of the Sahara have covered those walls of the old university, really covered them, and covered the streets where scholars used to go. But you can still go if you take your time and your money to go to Mali. At Ouagadougou, here, in Upper Volta. It's the capital of Upper Volta. Many people think the sounds are so un-Western. They hit our ears with a kind of strange feeling. Well, that's true. But the sounds sound like the languages of Africa, which are always rhythmic and certainly tonal. Now, it would be interesting, I think, for a student of African history to trace the Benin sculpture. The Benin sculpture in Nigeria has influenced European art. Modigliani, Braque, Picasso have admitted, I don't mean to imply that they had to admit, but they have said, in fact, that their art, that the new art that they devised in the early 1900s was influenced by the Benin and the Yoruba sculpture. The Yoruba are also in Nigeria. Now,
So that's just a little bit of context that inspired me to create this artist book, Timbuktu. I've always been interested in the history of the book. I've taken several courses on the history of the book. And so I wanted to create something to pay homage of Africa's influence on that history. And so that's where Timbuktu comes from. And so the Aga Khan Documentation Center of MIT Library acquired Timbuktu. And the Aga Khan Documentation Center is a research center focused on the built environment of Muslim societies. It supports teaching and scholarship on the history and theory of architecture, urbanism, environmental and landscape design, visual culture, as well as conservation, with a particular focus on research and teaching activities of the faculty, students, and postdoctoral fellows. So situated within MIT libraries, the Aga Khan Documentation Center is a part of MIT and was established in 1979 by a gift from His Highness, the Aga Khan. So through the acquisition, select archives of the Documentation Center include visual archives, architect archives, as well as scholars archives. So Timbuktu is presently being used as a teaching tool in collaboration with the Timbuktu Manuscript Training Project via the University of Hamburg. The Timbuktu Manuscript Training Project provides melanin instructors with training on how to conserve, digitize, and catalog manuscripts in Arabic script. The project takes place in Timbuktu, Mali, and is based on an innovative partnership between the United Nations and the Ahmed Baba Institute of Timbuktu. So in this artist book, I'm really teetering the line with sculpture because it can be mounted on the wall. And when you lie the artist book completely flat, the piece in the middle actually goes down. And then when you raise it up in sort of this little small little accordion in the middle, accordion design panels in the middle, it's like a pop-up. And so there are elements of architecture that you'll see in Timbuktu that resemble the paper piece, the pop-up piece on the end of this artist book. And then I'm also thinking about materials, color, sand, just the environment of that particular geographical area, excuse me. And so on the right side is a QR code that I've embedded in Timbuktu. It links out to the Library of Congress, where they have a digitized, they digitized several manuscripts, so you can see actual manuscripts from that particular era pertaining to law and medicine and all of these areas of study. And so the last artist book that I'll briefly talk about, because we're coming up on our time, is Voyage. Voyage was collected by Cynthia Sears at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art, and will be in an upcoming exhibit, Crossing the Line, The Passport Reimagined. This show opens October the 5th and runs through most of February 2025. So this exhibition brings awareness to issues of identity, national and political boundaries, human trafficking, and movement around the globe. Crossing the Line, The Passport Reimagined will travel to the San Francisco Center for the book, and also the Minnesota Center for Book Arts. Voyage will also be featured in the Crossing the Line, The Passport Reimagined exhibition catalog. So this is an artist book where I cut 6 linoleum pieces. You'll see influences from African masks in these images. Each page is handmade paper, and interleaved in between these prints are QR codes as well as text from a poem that I wrote many years ago before I created this artist book. And so in closing, I'd like to share that poem with you. Before the voyage to the sea, we were full with the sun's warmth on our skin. Africa's sun, passing over the warm desert sands, glimmering through the green lush of the bush, bright and shiny as the eyes of our children. Children who will never feel the warmth that sun can bring. Their skin will never feel the energy that feeds us, has fed us, and our ancestors before us. They will never know the protection of kings in a land fortified by the presence of God, felt since the beginning. A seed of darkness in the deep, dark soul, reaching in the cold, damp, rich earth. Rich with possibilities, that seed is snatched. Where fullness once dwelled, the earth is now cold. Slowly, the sun is fading from view behind the trees. Night bugs call to the stars as we march to the sea. Blood marks the paths, days with no sun. The love of kinship eroding away like the rocks on the shore, which the waves crash against in fury, but the dark seed will not be replenished back to the cool, damp soil. In its place, longing will grow, longing of kinship, never to return. Never to feel Africa's sun again, the sun that belongs to her, the suns that belong to her. Waves crash away our names. Humiliation rips away the self that knows the origin of our being. We leave behind our sun, our sons. Darkness cries from the belly of the ship, mirroring the sound of a million bees. Some of them fly away, trying to reach the sun. They sink to the bottom of the sea. With children in arms, they return to the land of the sun. Now joined with it, they shine on those they were forced to leave behind. Before the voyage to the sea, we were full. And now, all that remains is our skin to remind us of the sun's love, passing over the warm desert sands, glimmering through the lush green bush, bright and shiny as the eyes of our children. Thank you.